I had a question I wanted to pose to my supposed audience, I guess, and it was who or what has let you down the most out of everyone and everything you've been made aware of and that you feel has influenced your living. Um, so, for example, if a person were to answer that question, they might say themselves, which, ironically enough, if you are into what I do, where you sometimes talk about romance and you're male, people will tell you, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be entirely disappointed with your characteristics and all yada yada yada. But I have noticed that when there is a personal project, let me say a little old Donahue, I have a higher tendency to actually feel as though I've screwed up. So, for example, if I say, oh, let's say I'm going to write 20 or 30 pages and I'm around, something to allow me to write all of that and I don't do it, that's when I'm more likely to go, oh man, I should have done this. Why didn't I do it? Um, because I feel as though it's a personal choice that I made entirely of my own to not see that get done for that particular day. So if that, adds up. But I've seen that correlation whenever it's something that I think just entirely relies on me doing it and it doesn't get finished. That's when I'm more likely to feel saddened with my conduct in the affair. Now, if it's one of these romance things, that's a different story. we can debate and argue against that all the time. Um, but another one would probably be politics, and I guess the main frustration I have with that is we have two political parties that I believe are the same, and I can give examples of where they voted the same, they've stood for the same things, yada yada yada. But people will hear these examples and they'll ignore them. And it actually kind of moves to the commentator aspect because for as much as the politicians themselves bother me, I'm more bothered by people who actively participate in, reading about it, giving an opinion on it, whether it's on Twitter or here or somewhere else. And it seems like they can never go beyond their own set ideologies. For example, I'm someone who is pro-choice. I think women should have the right to abortion, but I can still see where someone would say, that's the killing of a child, and oh, people do it over and over again instead of birth control, which I'm sure probably does happen sometimes. I still think the good outweighs the bad, but I can see their point. I'm not going to demonize them for feeling the way that they do. And I think with a lot of commentators, they move to a direction where they basically, say, "Oh, I'm a conservative, so if you're having trouble financially, it's because you didn't work hard enough." Never mind the fact that many of the jobs that have been created don't have Medicare or any kind of health coverage that can actually, benefit you from whatever other crisis you're having in life. Like it's a they become parodies of themselves because they can't see outside of their own school of thought. So they've let me down, and it's really sad, especially when you consider that there are so few people who just actively keep up with this stuff. That when you get someone to pay attention and they act that way, it's even more self-defeating because it means that people who are in tune, or at least portray themselves as being in tune, really aren't. Um, and if you tell people that you're conceited and you think you're better than everybody else. Um, so I'd say the relationship stuff also has let me down. And I guess I would really boil that down to a couple of like if I were to say, oh, it's a person, it's more so the public opinion of it because thanks to incidents of violence, I don't have to mention any of them for you to know what I'm talking about. We have people who will sit here and say, oh well, if this person has a problem with getting a woman, that there must be something wrong with his mind or with who he is, and oh, he's gonna do whatever, and that's it has a merit in reality based off of what we've seen in some cases, but it's so assumptuous about such a large group of people that it still doesn't make sense just to think everyone is going to give off those vibes. um, but also goes back to the lack of empathy because it basically means that you have this thing that someone else in control of, choosing to be with you, and you have to basically keep it in the back burner of your mind because if you speak out about it, then It's time for us to tell you how, ugly you look and all of these other things that we're just going to go and say are the factor and the reason. And they don't, I said it before, they don't do that because they necessarily think you're the worst person that ever lived. They've convinced themselves that there must be something outwardly wrong with you that they, whether they're a male or a female, um, can see that you can't, and that this is the one or two things that's stopping you from ever being able to do this. So that's another disappointment that I feel I've been let down by that public opinion. I think a lot of people have been let down by it. Um, what else can I think of? I would say the other part is obviously the women that are involved, but more so the ones you talk with for a long period of time. Like I've had ones where you go, "Hey, what's up? How are you?" and then you don't hear anything back from them ever again. Um, and that it is what it is. But when that happens, at the very least, I don't feel as though I've been set up to think anything other than here was someone I tried to talk with, they ignored me, move on. When you talk with someone for 2 months, 3 weeks, however long, day after day after day, just for them to say they want to be friends or some other nonsense, it becomes a very grueling process. And I guess when you get the reception online, when you air this out, it's like adding insult to injury because it wasn't just bad enough that you had to spend time trying to talk with this person. Now it's time to play, detective and tell you all the ways that you're terrible. And a lot of us just are tired of hearing that. We were tired. I guess the way it works is that when you've been dumped on enough by people in real life, you don't want to hear it from anyone online. Um, and you come on an outlet like this to talk with people who've also experienced the same thing. And so when someone doesn't get it, that doesn't mean they're a horrible or bad person at all. There are a lot of people who are not, in that same bubble. But it is preferable that if you don't get it, you don't try to, interject yourself in it. For example, if I'm living, 2 or 3 blocks away from some forum where women are talking about periods, the only reason I would go is to listen to what they have to say. I wouldn't tell them, well, it's not such a bad thing after. No, because I've never experienced it. I'll never experience it. They say hello to Brought Vulture. Um, and I've actually had to shut down a couple of people who have tried to, I guess, push that narrative that oh well, the reason is yada yada yada. And I guess it's always framed in the basic mindset of if if people were so successful, wouldn't they read the score to us once in a while? Wouldn't we be hearing about the marriage rates increasing, the number of couples staying together year after year after year, broadening? Instead, the reverse is true. But we're not supposed to pay attention to that. We're not supposed to think maybe it's not just the guy. So that's another part of the fallacy that is perpetuated year after year. Um, Going back to the political stuff, it's not even just issues in the U.S. and just our commentators. Look at the American government and look at the way the media is reflective of it. You had Maddow, for example, who spent a whole year and a half talking about Trump and Russia, Trump and Russia, Trump and Russia, and you've got a crisis in Yemen where, thanks to Obama and Trump, well, more so Obama, 400,000 people, children rather, are left starving, near death because of all those crops and other food places that were destroyed by all those bombs. And no one talks about it. Just it goes completely hush hush by the media who wants you to think, the Trump era was the beginning of all the problems that we have. So they've let me down in that sense that there are stories they could report that go completely unnoticed. We just had this 717 billion spending bill, and if you go on any site like Twitter, Instagram, whatever, most people aren't talking about it. Um, and if they are, they're not saying, we have to plot to get this person who represents me out of office. Nothing. And it's really sad when you go and talk with, the few that actually are bothered by this to the point where they just start actively speaking about it over and over again, and then tell them, hey, let's try to set something up because there's so few of you that if you tried to set up like a protest, it's only gonna be like what 5, 6, 7 people. And then the other problem is when you try to inform someone of this issue, that issue in particular, all this money that was sent to the military, you get the same kind of trivial responses. Like right now, I could lay out all of the reasons why that budget was bad, and I'd still have somebody leave a comment talking about, you don't want to fund the military? I had that comment so much. And at first it was kind of annoying, and after a while it just became kind of saddening because it really means we have people who are so caught up in their ideology, this thing about, oh, we need, all this weaponry and yada, 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 that they can't see the forest for the trees. Like it would, if you spoke to a lot of, let's say children, 8, 9, 10, 11, I could sit some of them down and say, listen, if you want to increase the military budget, increase the pay raise to more than 2%. I've had people try to defend that. I call it that a crumb. It is, which is what it is, a small itty bitty increase. Um, and actually make sure that this money is not going to funding more wars. Like, oh, we're making jets. Yeah, that's going to be used in another conflict, including the upcoming war with Iran that nobody wants to talk about. So stuff like that disappoints me. That we have these people who, and it goes back to the political commentator thing. They're aware of political stories, and so they'll get praised for being part of the process, but they don't try to remove themselves from their bubble, um, and actually hear out all of the reasons why something is wrong. So it's another problem. Um, what else can I think of out of all these stories that are things that have bothered me that people have done? Um, I think that's pretty much it. It's funny how when we go through life, in a lot of cases, and we kind of look back, and this is especially the case when you get to be, you know, 60, 70, whatever. Um, they ask us if we have any regrets, and I regret the fact that some people left nasty comments. I regret the fact that I talked with some women and they ignored me after a few weeks. I regret the fact that I got turned down from a school or two. Um, But even as I regret all of those things, I don't feel there was anything I could have done to have changed them from what they were. They were the decision of somebody else. Now, I would easily say I regret not writing, this amount of whatever on this day because it's something I could have done, but, for whatever reason chose not to do, whether it was just feeling some kind of writer's block or fatigue, whatever. So, it's a really interesting thing, just the way we frame narratives. Like we always have to do this thing that the person made mistakes, during their youth, which nobody's perfect. So I expect most of us to willingly admit, making an error. But it feels that a lot of times when you try to talk about these things, there's this idea that most of it had to have been directly your fault, even by people who weren't there to experience it. Which, as I said before, goes back to the lack of empathy that we have, where you'll tell somebody, "Oh, I was lied to for 3 months by this other person," and they'll say you should have seen it coming. You should have, been able to read into their soul and figure out that they weren't telling you the truth. I was talking about this voice actor that I waited on for over a month, and I regret doing that because I was so confident in her ability to, act or whatever, that I didn't factor in, how much time she was eating up of mine. Just week after week, waiting and waiting and waiting, not even getting any response from her after reaching out twice or 3 times rather. And then, after you confront them about it, they frame it as you're the bad guy. Why would you send me such a rude response? Well, the other 2 responses weren't rude. And even this one, you didn't get cursed at, you didn't get called out of your name, which is both of which she did to me after I ended it. But you get the point. It's the hypocrisy thing and the lack of empathy. I tried to send her. I guess the way I looked at it was I tried to do to her what I would want done to me if I was working on a project. If you know, I don't if I am a director, or rather if I'm an actor for some project and I don't respond to the director multiple times, I'm going to I shouldn't be surprised, when they tell me to get out of there. Say hello to Dirk, who has been strangely absent for the last few minutes. But But yeah, with the political stuff, you actually have all of these issues that are going on in the world right now, and I guarantee you, when we get to next year, the year after that, people are going to say, "Oh man, how could we have not seen that coming? That was so shocking." Not really. Um, like for example, the Yemen thing. We have all of these people dying from famine and this disease, and no one's talking about it. But when we get a report about how that population has significantly decreased, everyone's going to go hysterical. And that will be another thing that let me down. The fact that, we had this knowledge and just chose not to do anything with it. It also goes back to, what else? The Palestinian thing. Or rather, the Saudi Arabia thing's another good example. Now, the U.S. Is close allies with Saudi Arabia, who, decimated Yemen. And I don't remember the exact details of this story, but Saudi Arabia got into some feud with Canada, and decided to send it a tweet with a picture of the Twin Tower and the an airplane going into it. Basically, saying we'll do this to you if you keep messing with us. For sticking your nose in what we say doesn't concern you. And nobody reported on it. Think about this. Our One of our top allies um, issued a terrorist threat against another ally of ours with our imagery of our worst terrorist attack ever, and not a single major source reports on it at all. And then when you try to when you do like a little, like what I did on Twitter with that campaign for that money, of just saying, hey, they did this. People, they, instead of saying, wow, I didn't know about that, they try to brush it off. I had a woman who told me that bringing up that, the billions of dollars, that was semantics. And as I sat there and I stared at that message, I said, wait a second. You have a population where the majority of people can't afford $1,000 emergency, and the government has hundreds of billions of dollars that it chooses not to give those people, but to instead, throw at, the military, and not even give the people in the military, a decent raise. And that's a semantic. That's something that, is just, oh, whatever. It's okay if the Democrats voted that way and called themselves for the middle class. That's all right. It's good. Let me say hello to Envoy. We're talking about, well, I'm trying to discuss things that have disappointed me. I've touched on the relationship stuff, the way that people act with these parties, with politics. All of it's, just mixed up together. So. Dirk says that's going to be another place in the Middle East. The U.S. is to replace world leaders. Yeah. If you're referring to Yemen, Dirk, I'm not sure. I think so. But it's a really despicable tale that we have all these people who just don't want to pay attention to it. And they get praised for doing the most basic of work. Like, I mean, in an era where I think it's like 87% of people have internet access, and you don't know about most of these stories, that's because you go to the same place over and over again. I've read some Breitbart, I've watched some Fox, just all these different sources, and I do that because I want to be aware of any perspective, position, or issue that might not be discussed somewhere else. Friend, we were talking about the Middle East and their culture. Yeah, that is. Let's hear this. I heard you mention, which is why I mentioned it. Um, yeah, that I mentioned it because it's a crisis area that is really being overlooked in favor of nonsense. Like, could you imagine if, for as much people as we have obsessed with that Trump Stormy Daniels thing, if we had as many people wanting a two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Dream Villain says, "Yep, all the news shows is celebrity gossip, pretty much." And year after year, we're going to keep hearing about Mueller and his investigation, Mueller and his investigation. Who's getting indicted? Who's going to jail? As though we care. I start to see the BS more and more through the liberals and Democrats. Dirk says, when I go to the radical source, I just end up leaving in shock from how much propaganda they push. Well, Dirk, here's the thing: most people, if like they can be presented propaganda, and if they have an actual ideology, they can just ignore it. Like for example, I could sit here and I watched this movie that was about Obama's final year in office, and they were trying to frame him as the hero that didn't get to do what he wanted to do and all this nonsense. And I walked away from it still thinking he was, you know, what he, the executor of many deaths. Let's put it that way. And when you say something like that, because it's so not normal to what you hear on the news, people call that a conspiracy theorist. They say this is some nonsense that can't be proven, but we have proof that he was involved with the chaos in Libya, and obviously in Yemen, and that this is something that Trump hasn't exactly moved that far away from. And yet, when you complain about this, they get mad because they want you to keep believing these parties are different when I can show you votes where it's one man, where literally it's like 5 or 6 guys don't vote for it and everybody else does. And they just keep wanting you to pretend this didn't happen. Okay, Dream Villain says, "Yup," or something about North Korea. I'm so tired about hearing about North Korea. I'd love to hear about them if it meant we could actually, get a peace treaty. Uh, Envoy says it is for those who can be easily led that fall for propaganda. I think it has more so to do with just having no ideology. Like there are people who are into politics because they like the celebrity of it. Oh, is this person going to run? Are they going to run? Are they going to run? Are they going to run? That's why you have so many people obsessing about this presidential election instead of all these issues. Dirk says that is something be to not be talked about just because we are fueling the fight in both sides. Yeah, and I mentioned earlier, Dirk, how I hate the fact that we have these like commentators on Twitter and YouTube and all these other places where it seems like they can never go beyond whatever their ideology is. Like I'm a person who thinks we should have the welfare state, but I can still admit it's flawed, that people abuse it, and that it'd be better if it was a merit-based system. Like, oh, you have one kid, and then we'll give you this. You have two, that one has to go for adoption, or there's some kind of cutoff point. But the main reason I don't want to get rid of it is because while I'm not sympathetic to those that abuse it, I'm empathetic to those that actually find themselves making one mistake and then going and working a job at the same time, and their children that had nothing to do with their parents being idiots. And we've already talked about the evilness of uh, parents in some other stories. All right, what was a great point, Envoy? I don't know. I was saying a lot of words. Let's see what else is here. Let's see if I read everybody's stuff. In their ideology or their gender that they can't even see from the other's perspective. This goes back to the relationship thing. All those people who say you're going to be a shooter or homosexual if you can't get a woman. If it's a female saying that, more often than not, you can tell she's never had to deal with heartbreak of having some guy that she liked who wouldn't even give her a chance. That's said, "I'm going to go and talk with someone else." She hasn't had people who, after she admitted to getting turned down 20, 30, 40 times, told her, "You have to change all of what you are, who you are at all, or just anything." You know, never had that. I've actually got a story for you that it's either going to be out this week or next week about this celebrity that left. Someone like asked her, what do you have, how do you handle heartbreak? And her response was, I mean, that if you were to take the top 10 dumbest statements of this year, hers would be in the top three. Let's put it that way, at least in regards to that topic. Do you when I realized, oh, do you know when I realized men and women aren't equal? It wasn't when started critiquing me, it began when men started automatically taking just because they're, yeah, well, that's why you have so many people who defend the ones I talk about. Now, here's a group of people who are spread all across the world, some in the US, some in other countries, and they only have one thing in common, that's being a female that I found myself wanting to, develop something with. And so after it turns out to not be the way I would have wanted, I speak about it because I'm upset with it, and I have the First Amendment right to do so. And people feel the need to defend these people they've never met before. It was the strangest thing to me. I couldn't get it. And I think the criticisms are fair. I don't call them, I don't say, "Oh, she was ugly. I'm glad they didn't." No, I don't do any of that. I talk about what with that person I felt caused it to be the way it is. Okay, for example, if what does oh no, Envoy, I think you're talking about one of those component stories where it has to do with ethnicity. So shh, be very, very quiet. Literally, I've had that topic almost just refrain from even speaking about. People get so enraged for no reason. So, what happened to Dirk? Where'd he go? Dirk, where are you? Dirk. Yeah, where'd you go? Saying yo. Oh, I know it annoys me too, Envoy. But I have to read comments that are directed toward acknowledging that particular issue, and they go back to this thing of not understanding the other person's perspective. And it's really the most frustrating out of all of these because it's like you would think the simplest of things people will just find themselves objecting to. Let me see. Trying to think of what else I can say. Um, but yeah, I guess we might have reached a conclusion here. The most annoying, the thing that has let me down the most is the reception of others. Like you get ignored most days of your life by most people you know. Um, and you're told to just deal with whatever drama comes your way. Say, man, people make like we always talk about. Oh man, being in love and being friends. Those are the relationships are the best part of life. Relationships can be some of the most disgusting and despicable things we can engage in. And I'm not saying all of them are, so don't even bother writing that or interpreting it that way. But just like I tell you guys about this friend of mine I had for years that I had to, go and call up and tell him, I want to come over to your house. And I eventually ended up cutting it off because I was tired of it feeling like it was a one-way street. Um, and, because it's something that I chose to end, I'd get blamed for it ending. I'm supposed to just sit there and accept the fact that someone you think actually cares about you won't initiate anything with you. Okay. Envoy says there's a thin line between love and hate. We all know this. It seems so. And then Dream Villain says agreed based on what I've seen in life. Oh, what's going on? Someone messed up the connection. Wait a second, let me see. Oh, I think something's going on. But in conclusion, whatever you've been let down by the most, make a list of it and try to avoid it, which is what I try to do. Because life is too short to allow the same issues to, just kind of like stay bottled up inside of you and not talk about it or let it out. And I guess I can do this because I feel confident enough in trying to prevent it um, from happening that I just don't feel like it's my fault where it's go, oh man, I'm so horrible. I'm done. Envoy says, I remember talking to a group of friends a while back and I said the fault of a community of people is usually due to their own doing. Hey, hey, shh, keep quiet. We can't discuss topics like that, Envoy. We get hate mail. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope that I was able to, speak on something that a lot of us deal with: the problem of being let down by others or organizations or anything in general, even ourselves. I think I've aired out most of those in this, and hopefully it was enjoyable. Maybe, who knows? But thank you, and I might have something right up after this. Possibly. We'll find out.